breaking news.
And that breaking news right now at noon, Colt Gray is waiting to learn his fate. A judge could decide as early as today whether he serves a life sentence with or without the possibility of parole. I'm Brooks Baptiste.
And I'm Cyria Sandlin. Gray pleaded guilty to charges in the Appalachia High School shooting that left 4 people dead and 9 hurt 2 years ago. 2 14-year-old students, Christian Angulo and Mason Schermerhorn, and 2 teachers, Richard Aspinwall and Christina Irmi, were killed September 4th, 2024. His sentencing comes after victims and their family members spoke Friday in the courtroom. Shayna Aspinwall, whose husband Richard was killed in the shooting, asked the judge to sentence Gray to life without parole.
He knew that bringing a weapon into a school was wrong. He knew that pulling that trigger was wrong. He knew that every choice he made that day would forever alter countless lives.
No sentence the court imposes can bring my husband back. Nothing can restore the life he should have lived or the years he should have shared. But I ask the court to recognize the profound and permanent harm this crime has caused.
Now at noon, we are taking a live look inside the courtroom. Today, the defense brought a forensic psychologist to the stand who was asked to interview and evaluate Colt in the aftermath of the shooting. Let's take a listen.
I thought you were locked out.
Seems to me he now has pretty clear memory of what happened.
Right.
Okay. And there's another call the next month on November 11th. This is 8:25 p.m. from 8:53 to 9:46.
You want me to do the post first? Yeah. So there's a bunch of the article, yeah. You do the article? Okay. Thank you. You coming Tuesday again? Duh. Yeah. You know it. Okay, first one.
And what you've been listening to is testimony there in that courtroom, actually calls, I should say, between Colt Gray and his mother. Atlanta News First reporter Mary Kate Hamilton is live for us at the Barrow County Courthouse. Mary Kate, Dr. Kevin Richards, who is that psychologist that was on the stand, said that Colt Gray became obsessed with prior school shootings leading up to that tragic day on September 4th of 2024.
Yeah, that's right. He said Colt had already been struggling with depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideations when he became obsessed with true crime community forums online, and specifically with school shootings and school shooters. Now, Dr. Richards also characterized Gray's home life, an upbringing marred by tragedy, marred by dysfunction. He says frequent moves, chaos, financial problems, neglect, physical abuse, and reported drug abuse by both parents were things that Colt dealt with his entire life. Now, he says Colt was always an isolated child, but then eventually found community in those true crime forums, chatting with other online users who were also obsessed with school shooters. He said Colt took a particular interest in Adam Lanza, who killed 26 in the Sandy Hook shooting, and Nicholas Cruz, who killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Dr. Richards noted Colt's long history, again, of depression and suicidal ideation, but he said there was no evidence of mania, schizophrenia, or insanity at the time of the shooting. Regardless, Dr. Richards said he still believes intervention is possible and that Colt could respond to psychiatric treatment.
He was a lonely, dysfunctional kid who was anxious, paranoid, depressed, and immersed in this highly dysfunctional world with these people that were obsessed with folks who had done school shootings. So his interpersonal behavior was very dysfunctional and kind of layered on with the psychological issues. He had just kind of disappeared into Discord and disappeared into the true crime community.
Now, in cross-examination, the prosecution challenged that. Prosecution grilled Dr. Richards about Colt's propensity to lie on true crime community forums and even to lie to police in the very aftermath of the shooting. They played phone calls between Colt and his mother where he appeared to plan to plead insanity to get a not guilty verdict. And the prosecution insinuated that Colt Gray lied to Dr. Richards himself in order to garner sympathy and potentially help himself. A few other things of note: Discord messages between Colt and other online users saying that he loved Nicholas Cruz so much that the only way he could prove his love to Nick, he called him, was to carry out this attack on September 4th. Again, September 4th, the date that was continuously brought up on those online forums. And then, of course, was the day that those 4 lives were tragically lost and 9 others were hurt. So Dr. Richards still on the stand right now, again in cross-examination. We'll have continued coverage all day long. But for now, live at the Barrow County Courthouse, I'm Mary Kate Hamilton, Atlanta News First.
Mary Kay, thank you. And right now, of course, the community still has a lot of questions about how this sentencing is going to play out. So joining us now via Zoom is criminal defense attorney Joshua Schiffer and legal analyst. Joshua, thanks for your time as always. Let's get right into this. What would you say are some of the key legal factors that the judge is going to have to weigh when deciding between life with parole and life without parole?
Well, just to review for people who haven't been following this quite as closely, that's the big question we're all waiting for today. Judge Prim's job is to determine which of the 2 available sentences under Georgia law he should apply for a juvenile that has been convicted or pled guilty to such terrible, awful crimes. A bare majority of states are with Georgia in allowing life without parole for juvenile serious crimes, and about 23 or 24 states actually prohibit the court from sentencing to life without the possibility of parole. So Judge Prim is evaluating and contextualizing all of the mental health and other mitigating information being presented by the defense, while at the same time listening very closely to the testimony and presentation of the state, showing why the judge should exercise his ultimate power in sentencing young Mr. Gray to life without the possibility of parole. To do that, he's paying close attention to this mental health testimony, since that's the strongest mitigation the defense is able to put forward. But unfortunately, this presentation does not seem to be fully cohesive. There are direct contradictions. There are questions for these expert witnesses about how much thought and planning Colt had put into this incident, or whether, as the defense would like the court to believe, this was an incident that just kind of happened because of the specific mania and other delusions he was working under on this particular day. It's a very complicated set of facts, and it's not like there's a clear burden telling the judge, rule like this or rule like that. Right. This is specifically why we elect judges to use their morals and values in their community.
You know what, Joshua, I think when we heard from that psychologist earlier this morning in the 9 o'clock hour, like most viewers, we were probably all to some degree disturbed by some of the details that came regarding how this attack played out, what led up to it. I mean, talking days until it happened, weeks and even months. Realistically, though, if the judge sentences Colt Gray to life with parole, when is the earliest that Colt Gray could be released?
Oh, we're looking through a standard parole eligibility guidelines 20, 30, 40 years in the future. But that's also going to depend on how the sentence is actually structured when the court enters it. Colt Gray pled guilty under a non-negotiated process this past Friday. That allows the judge to sentence him on every single one of the 55 charges. But Georgia law is very specific in combining and merging a number of those charges. His sentence sheet won't list all 55 convictions. There will be a smaller number of convictions, and how those convictions are set forth, that determines the parole process. If the sentences are run concurrently versus consecutively, some can be run concurrent while others consecutive. It's a very complicated mathematical structure. And it's not very easy. So it's hard to say when specifically he would be considered for parole, other than it would be decades in the future. But that may be his best opportunity for relief, because we still don't know when and if the juvenile issue will be reaching a federal court. It is actively being litigated. We will see federal court action on the juvenile life sentences sometime.
You know, that's just another thing that in a way complicates the case, but that's what we're all watching for. Criminal defense attorney Joshua Schiffer, thanks as always for joining us. And we're going to continue to hear from
Absolutely.
Josh
Thank you.
as we are following this hearing throughout the afternoon. Right now, we are carrying that hearing live on Atlanta News First Plus. You can watch that wherever you stream, on Apple TV, on YouTube TV, along with Android TV as well. And we're also going to be carrying the hearing on Thursday for Colt Gray's father, Colin Gray, who was convicted of giving his son access to that gun that was used in the shooting. Right now, he is facing more than 100 years in prison. And you can keep up with this entire hearing by downloading the free Atlanta News First app. Just scan this QR code that you see here on your screen.